Thank you for coming, everybody. It's time. So this lecture series, actually, from my perspective, this grew out of just a conversation in the circulation desk. Frank was coming to a class here and was talking about stuff and said, well, I can teach things too. So he's here. He decided to teach on Moby Dick, and we're very happy to have him here. We're happy to have everyone here. Happy to have Macy come and film this for Channel 8, as he does so often, which is wonderful. So if you need to show your friends this one, so they'll come next week to the second lecture.
And then a third.
And the third, absolutely.
Are they all going to be a week apart exactly?
Yes.
Yes, yeah. So every Thursday for 3 weeks, which will give you time to finish the book, right? Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm introduced?
Yes.
All right. Yeah. Kerry sent out this thing with PhD after my name. I'm kind of embarrassed about that. One, no association with the Academy, which is a shameful institution these days. Anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about American literature. I'm talking about Herman Melville. I'm talking about Moby Dick specifically. You probably have all heard that American literature begins with one book, and that book is Huckleberry Finn. That was said by the great prophet Ernest Hemingway, who doesn't know very much about American literature. And unfortunately, in academia, that has become a refrain. People say that all American literature comes out of one book, blah, blah, blah. That's just nonsense. Just as in the recent MOOC, someone purported this, that all literature comes out, all American literature comes out of Ralph Waldo Emerson, which is just truly crazy. The movement for an idiosyncratic, an individual American literature begins just about the day after, or maybe the day before, the Declaration of Independence was issued. And there really was a concerted attempt to create a nation based upon a unity of ideas. We were not Americans by virtue of our families or by virtue of the parts of Europe that we came from, some other plot, but really we were united by a bunch of ideas. And that search for and attempt to assert an American identity becomes the passion of a relatively small group of people who are quite insistent upon it. It begins, as I said, late in the 18th century, but it continues through the decades of the 19th century. It really starts to bloom somewhere around 1820, and by 1850, we really have a core of people who've now found the confidence in their own voices and in their identity to set about creating an American literature. And there's even a group in New York gathered by a man named Everett Dyking who took on the label Young America. And his chief asset, as he saw it, was Herman Melville. And he did a number of reviews for Dyking in promotion of this idea of an American literature. Dyking issued a series called The Library of America. And Typee, Melville's first book, was one of its prime assets. And it was in that role as a promoter of Dyking's idea of Young America that Melville ran across and wrote a review of Mosses from an Old Manse, Hawthorne's collection of tales. And much has been made of that. There's a wonderful correspondence between the two authors. Unfortunately, we have lost, or it has been lost, what has been lost is Hawthorne's part of the correspondence. But we still have Melville's, and it's a wondrous thing to read. But I think it's too much emphasis has been placed upon Hawthorne as the man who was the guide. There really are very different writers. Hawthorne is essentially an allegorist. Melville is really a symbolist, and the difference is this. In allegory, you have one thing representing another, and you proceed along these dual tracks, these dual rails, as the narrative moves along. And it depends upon that ready identification of the thing represented in the other thing, which is on the surface of the narrative. Melville's view of this is to create that which stimulates thought, which has, I won't even say ambivalence, but multivalence. that the thing that is being written about has far flashings, that it suggests all sorts of things. The mind is the great adventurer always in Melville. Now, Melville didn't come out of nowhere. Born in 1819, pardon this little bit of biography, I think it helps us to get to the book itself. Born in 1819 in New York City, he is a descendant of two very important American families with some pedigree. He soon moves up to upstate New York, where the Gansevoort, the mother side of the family, has roots. They're really quite well off. But the father is, unfortunately, a rather greedy man, as many of us are. He invests heavily in enterprises that don't have the soundest prospects, sort of like Trump University. And what happens is that this well-to-do family, its fortunes suddenly collapse, truly collapse. And so young Herman, who has started off with an education for a man of his family station society, with an education at Albany Classical School, and then from there moving on to Albany Academy, which was one of the better academies in the young nation. Suddenly, that prospect is yanked out from under him, and so at age 13, he has to get a job. And from then until the 1840s, he tries one thing and another. He's a schoolmaster for a while. He works as an accountant, a bookkeeper for a while. He has all these various experiences, and they all feed into what he will eventually write about. But for us, of course, the most important jog in his career is his going to sea. And he ships off first on a merchant ship that goes to England. Next, he gets on a whaler, and that leads to another whaler, and then a third whaler, all on one initial voyage. So he gets to experience what it's like to be a member of the crew. And then finally, yeah. Go ahead.
How old was he when he went to sea, Frank?
When he went to sea? Let's see, 10, 20, 22 would be what, third? Around, I have it written down somewhere. I hate to consult notes. Goes to sea, 1839 is the first time, so he's now 20 years old. I was never very good at arithmetic because it was boring because the answer was already there, and I think the process of finding the answer. Anyway, and so that experience has a great resonance. During that time of trying to find his way, he visits his uncle in Pittsfield. And that becomes a very important contrast to the life he has had before. He loves that place, and all of you should go down and visit it. And you could actually be in a room where part of Moby Dick was written. And you get a feel for the kind of life he had in those crowded circumstances. Anyway, so he now has no real prospects for it. He's not a lawyer, as one of his brothers was. He's not got enough of a foundation in business to do much with that. What can he do? Well, he's always loved language, and so he decides he's going to try his hand at writing. And what is an obvious choice is to do something with his experience in the South Seas, when he had jumped ship in an island called, I can't pronounce it, something like that. He's there only a month, but he expands it into a 4-month account. Now, that is probably his biggest success with the public during his lifetime. One can say that it opens up the South Seas as literary territory for an American writer. Maybe you could say for an Anglo-American writer or a Euro-American writer. And there's a reason for that. Not only is the United States becoming an important nation on the international stage, but there's also that contrast between the natives of these islands and the experience of growing up in America. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Taipei. What happens in Taipei is only loosely a novel. A lot of it is just simple recounting of experience, most of it made up, not all of it, in which there are two tribes on the island. Now, Melville really likes that idea of doubleness, of contrast. And while he's there, the man who's Herman Melville takes the name Tomo, the concern is that this other tribe called the Harpers. The Harpers are reputed to be cannibals. And there's this great fear always among sailors who left the ship and left this extension of Europe and America to go among the natives, always this fear of cannibalism. But there was something else that I think struck Melville's imagination, more than cannibalism, and this he had to be rather careful in writing about it. Cannibalism, one human being eating another, that was horrible, but not quite as shocking to the Puritan imagination as sex. Now, you have to remember that here's a man who has, during his early years, been raised by rather strict, in the company of rather strict churches, the Dutch Reformed Church, the Presbyterian Church, and now he describes, and this is faithful to reality, and I have it written down here somewhere. Ah, yes. The ship Dolly is met by canoes of native women, all without clothes. And this is Melville's account for it in Type B. Our ship was now given up to every species of riot and debauchery. Not the feeblest barrier was interposed between the unholy passions of the crew and their unlimited gratification. Well, I mean, that causes him to start thinking, what is wrong and what is right? What is forbidden because of its very nature, and what is forbidden simply because it's dictated by, or that custom says that one should not behave that way? And that question resonates throughout his writing. Melville is a cultural relativist, and yet at the same time he's fearful of the implications of that. Is nothing forbidden by its very nature? Is there a God who decrees what our lives should be? Or is one free to do anything at all? How does one deal with the question of justice? If there is no God, then is everything permitted? And if justice is the ultimate good, as it was for Immanuel Kant, how do we ensure its imposition on human society? And we get that question in book after book after book. Okay, Type B is his first book. Great success. The career is launched. Becomes almost an instant classic in America, according to what Dyking would have us see it as. His next book is a follow-up, more humorous. It's a few scraps here and there. It lets his imagination wander. He derives things from other accounts, changes them. And that too is a success, though not as great a success as Type P. 2 books down. Now he is ready to write the book that will give him the kind of reputation he thinks that he is worthy of. Not some account, not that he despises it, but a casual account of life in the South Seas, but a more philosophical book. And so he writes Marty. Marty is, in my judgment, kind of unreadable. But not because it's bad in its conception. It's fascinating in its conception. And Melville thought this was his great book. Unfortunately, the public did not agree, and it was not a great financial success. But it's a quest. We start off with life and society of the South Seas, and then it turns into a quest for certainty, a quest for truth. And as always in life, certainly for males, there is that ideal woman who is yellow, and she is, of course, blonde and quite innocent, unsullied by any sin. And then there is Hautia. And Hautia, of course, is dark. And this is a convention, certainly in 19th century literature, pretty much internationally, but certainly in America. Blondes are innocent, right? Blondes are innocent, and brunettes, dark women are sultry and sexual and dangerous. We've sort of reversed that in the 20th century, but that was the convention in the 19th century. The quest for Yilla, and he can't really resolve this book. All right, he's now a writer. He's had a book that's not a disaster exactly, but certainly no success. What is he going to do? He's got to earn money by his pen, so he writes 2 books, and one of them he's particularly ashamed of is called Redburn. And it's about a young man, very much like Melville himself, Wellingborough Redburn, and he goes on a merchant ship, just as Melville did, goes to Europe, and there he encounters some experiences which he has to resolve in some way. And one of them is this woman with 2 children who's starving. How can this happen? He looks for his way around London. He only has a map. And that map was his father's map. And it doesn't correspond to the current reality. So there again, conditions change. Does morality change? The doubleness of things. He runs into a fellow named Harry Bolton. Harry Bolton is something of a scamp, probably a homosexual. He goes to a place which he thinks is a gambling house. There again, appearance. The reality is it's probably a male brothel. But all this is sort of subtly suggested in the book. It's not said openly. Doubleness, and where does one go? What is right and what is wrong? This is, again, becomes a theme in Whitejacket, which is about Melville's experience on a frigate called the United States. And what horrible things happened was seamen were flogged. Incidentally, that caused flogging to be outlawed in the United States Navy, because Dyking saw to it that everybody got a copy of the book in the United States Congress. And as a result of the horror of what was read about, this was outlawed. But Melville is also interested, again, in this theme of doubleness, of evil, of a fellow named Jackson, who is the incarnation of evil, and he's a tyrant. And then we have a good fellow named Richard Chase, and he's the innocent. And you will see these ideas and these figures recur. Even in his last book, Billy Budd, you can actually trace these characters back to the early representation in Redburn. Melville said that that book was just written for money, and he despised it. But if you read the book, I think it's really a remarkably good book. I don't know why he hated it so. Do you agree, Margaret? Yeah, and I would recommend it to all of you. All right, so it's now 1850, and he's planning his next book. That next book is Moby Dick. And it's an amazing thing. Here's this classic, and we know so little about its composition. And a lot of what we think we know is pure speculation. The theory is that he wrote Moby Dick almost complete, because he writes to his publisher, I think it's his publisher, and says, I'll have the book done just shortly, a few months, by December. But then he goes on and writes for another 6 months. So what was going on there? The theory is that he read Hawthorne, and as a result of that reading, he changed the book around. But there's no textual evidence of that whatsoever. This is pure conjecture. And I don't think it's really true. Of course, the book evolves. Any book evolves in the course of its composition. But this notion that there really were 2 Moby Dicks, that Bulkington, whom you've encountered if you've reread the book, is a major character, was to be a major character in the first version of the book. This is completely unsubstantiated. We have no sign that was his indication in anything he ever wrote. What I think does happen is that in the course of writing this book, and this is supported by things that Melville wrote, the idea grows. Okay, what is Moby Dick? How do we see it? To me, it seems relatively simple to understand the basic design of the book. Most American novels relied, at least earlier, relied heavily on plot. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. Melville, instead of trying to find a unity through action, tries to find a unity through the play of ideas. And this is partly, I think, influenced by his reading at this time of an English essayist named Brown, who wrote Religio Medici and another book, which is really quite delightful reading, but they don't conform to a plan. You can't plot it out. And I think he tries to do the same thing here. Okay, how do we read this book? How does it start? Most people say it starts, "Call me Ishmael," but that's not the way Melville meant it to be started. Note that it starts out with etymology. And again, you find various theories as to why this was the case. First I have to tell you something about the actual production of the book. Melville decides he writes the book and he's going to put it up, he's going to put it in the form of plates, right? That's the American version, because he wants to be able to print it out and sell the book to another publisher, principally to a publisher in England, because it was thought that copyright in England was a better bet than the copyright in the United States. So he has the book set in plates, but the first time it's sold to the public, its first publication, is as the book entitled The Whale, and it's published in England. The interesting thing is that when these two copies are conflated, because they are rather different, they're always conflated in different ways. In England, the English edition, etymology and extracts does not start the book. It comes at the end. Obviously, the publisher thought, who cares about this stuff? This is just minor stuff. We'll put it at the end. But in the American version, and there's also no etymology. That was added later. Apparently, after no etymology in the American version of the book, the first plates of the book. Obviously, what Melville did was he added etymology after the book was set in plates, and that part was, not etymology, epilogue. Gosh, my brain is going. That was added after he made the whole set of plates. So even after the book is being, ostensibly completed, it's still evolving in his mind. All right. So let's pay attention to the way in which he sets up the book. Etymology. Where does this word come from? There are different words for whale. Well, why do we care about that? It's part of this notion of our inability to grasp the meaning of the world, the meaning of the whale. What exactly is this? And what exactly are we trying to hunt for as readers in understanding what this hunt represents? We go to extracts supplied by a sub-librarian, right? Reference to himself, sort of slant-wise, but nevertheless. So here we have all these different extracts. How ludicrously inadequate they are in explaining what the whale is. How pitiful all this is compared to the majesty of not only the animal itself, but of man's intellectual quest to understand the conditions of his being, his relationship to the world, and also to God. All right, now we come to the very beginning, the beginning of the story, as it were. And that first chapter is entitled Loomings, but it's not just the title of this first chapter, it's also the title of the first part of the book. Melville goes to great lengths to establish this fellow named Ishmael. No, part of the reason people, it's one of the famous openings in all of literature, is it seems so casual. Hi, reader, don't call me Mr., just call me Ishmael. That's my name. Let's be on a first name basis. Let's be informal. We're talking to each other as equals. That's an important idea, right? But there's also importance in the name Ishmael that Melville gives to this guy. Why Ishmael? Who was Ishmael? Ishmael was the son of Abraham, or Abram. at the time.
The bastard son.
Pardon?
The bastard son.
The bastard son, exactly. Why did he have a bastard son? Because Sarai, later Sarah, these Jews are changing their names all the time. The wife, Sarai, is too old. She's 75. He's 85, a little bit past childbearing age, wouldn't you say? So she says, I know what's destined for you. And so Hagar is my maidservant. Sleep with Hagar. Hey, being given permission? Sure. And as a result, Ishmael is born. But then Sarai, later Sarah, herself becomes pregnant. Miracle. And out of that, Isaac is born. What happens to Hagar? Sarah says, out of the house. Take her away. Let her go off. And so Ishmael, her son, becomes an exile. And what did this kid do? Nothing. He's an innocent. Did he control his destiny? No. This was all worked out by God finally, but also by the conventional needs here of establishing a line. So Ishmael is an exile. Ishmael is a kind of orphan. And that theme of orphanhood is central to the book that follows. Right? In a sense, ultimately, we're all orphans, and we have to deal with that, and especially in our relationship with the Father in heaven, if he exists. Okay. So in his first book, we have Ishmael talking about himself. But he doesn't tell us a lot about his background. He doesn't tell us, where he came from, who his school teacher was. He talks about himself as a person who meditates. He's like Narcissus, but he doesn't want to be like Narcissus. In talking about himself, in looking at his image in the water, he's got to be careful not to become so fascinated. Remember, Narcissus is not quite a narcissist. Narcissus in mythology is fascinated with his image, but he doesn't really see himself. What Melville is saying here is that we should not be like Narcissus and so become so enraptured by our image, what we look like in the mirror, that we lose sight of all else and therefore become hypnotized and fall into that image and perish. We have to keep our sense of identity separate into ourselves, and the nature of that identity is always to quest for meaning. And that's what he does. He keeps looking and looking and looking for, in reading the world that he encounters, for ultimate meaning, for the implications of things. So we see him now in this environment. He leaves Manhattan, he goes off to New Bedford, and then from New Bedford he goes to Nantucket. Why did he do that? It's not necessary to the plot of the book, but it becomes a way of emphasizing isolation. Nantucket itself becomes a symbol. It's got an international population, men of all colors, from all parts of the world. It's a tight-knit community, and they ship out as members of crews, have to deal with each other. But they are also all isolados. Then we have, that is, isolated beings. Then we have among his most important encounters on Nantucket, the sermon with Father Mapple. And I've often wondered if the name Mapple, and when I first read the book when I was, 13 or something, I thought it was just a misspelling or a cute way of saying maple, and I wondered why he chose that name. But sometimes I've wondered whether there was not a reference here to his Melville's use of map in Redburn. I don't know, but Mapple gives a sermon that is based upon the book of what? Jonah, the story of Jonah. What has Jonah done? Jonah has tried to outsail his sin, to go beyond this world, to deny God, to say God will not find me. But no matter, and he goes to the ends of the earth, as the world was known then, and he fails because the whale swallows him. and then regurgitates him, which is a kind of rebirth. And in that story, we have a foreshadowing of the design of the book itself, because there will be that encounter with the whale in which one's identity is threatened, finally, and then one person is belched forth to tell the tale, and that will be Ishmael. But look at what Mapple's sermon also tells us. Mapple is very certain in speaking to his congregation as to the meaning of the story of Jonah. But he's, at the end, he also reveals that there is doubt in the preacher. I just wanted to read at the end here. I'm sorry, before I get to that, I should have dealt with this earlier. The previous chapter is called The Chapel, and we go into the chapel and we see the presentiments of death in the tombstones, in the plaques. This is a dangerous thing, this adventure of whaling. Life itself is dangerous and will ultimately end in death. So what has this journey all come to if it's all for nothing ultimately? Well, he says that faith is important for, we all develop faith as a way of overcoming the idea of death. But faith, like a jackal, feeds among the tombs. And even from these dead doubts, she gathers her most vital hope. Faith does, that is us. It needs scarcely to be told with what feelings on the eve of a Nantucket voyage I regarded those marble tablets, and by the murky light of that darkened, doleful day, read the fate of the whalemen who had gone before me. Yes, Ishmael, the same fate may be thine, but somehow I grew merry again. Delightful inducements to embark, the fine chance for promotion, it seems. A stove-boat will make me an immortal by brevet. Yet, yes, there is death in this business of whaling, a speechlessly quick, chaotic bundling of a man into eternity. But what then? Methinks we have hugely mistaken this matter of life and death. Methinks that what they call my shadow here on earth is but my true substance. Methinks that in looking at things spiritual, we are too much like oysters, observing the sun through the water, and thinking that thick water the thinnest of air. Methinks my body is but the lees of my better being. In fact, take my body who will. Take it if I say it is not me, and therefore 3 cheers for Nantucket, and come to a stove boat and stove body when they will, for stave my soul, Jove himself cannot. You know, he's in Nantucket, he's going to become a member of the crew, and somehow this experience that we are going to have with him vicariously will have meaning, will have reference to the meaning of life itself, to the value of life. Faith requires us to believe in God. Do we have anything to believe in if God denies us the signs of his actual existence? We keep having that played over and over again in this opening section of the book. Idea is laid aside, idea. Everything is linked in this section as they march 2 by 2 forward. Then we have a description of the crew, and special emphasis is placed on the knights and squires. It's almost as though this is a medieval allegory about life itself. Knights and squires. And we have special emphasis on the 3 mates, which are different ways of looking at life. Right? Starbuck, before he went in the coffee business, is a man of reason, right? He's a man of reason. And yet he also cannot completely extinguish superstition in his life. He tries to be rational in all his calculations, but that falls short. Then we have Stubb. He seems indifferent to death. He's a very brave fellow. And yet, deep down, there's also that element of him which recognizes the danger. He's sort of the middleman of the three. And finally, we have Flask, who doesn't recognize danger at all. Are these the ways to approach life? Well, as we will see, as we will see, they are all in and of themselves inadequate. And then we come to the introduction of Ahab himself, right? These names are really quite important. Melville loves biblical names. They're all elusive. Let's take the owner of the ship, Peleg, right? Peleg comes from the Bible, not a common name, but Peleg is present when the earth is divided into three parts. And conventionally, in the explanation of that part of the Bible, that is seen as the division of the world: Africa, Europe, and Asia. Did Melville really want to hammer home that symbol? I don't think so. But in his mind, it was consequent. It was allied to his purpose. Bildad. Who was Bildad? Bildad is one of the friends of Job. Melville's personal Bible has more marginal comments in the book of Job than all the rest of the book put together. And you can understand why, for a man who was concerned about justice. You know, remember the story. Job wants to know why all these things have been inflicted on me. Hey, look, I've gone to church on Sunday or synagogue on Saturday. I've done all the things I was supposed to do. And yet here my animals are dying, I lose sons, one thing after another. Why me, God? And Bildad is one of his friends, and he's the conventional friend. He says, well, that's the way it is. You got to accept. You've got to accept whatever God has sent you as a sign of your being tested, and it's all right. Don't question it. Well, for Melville, that's not a proposition he is willing to embrace. All right, but then you have these two, Peleg and Bildad, both Quakers, but they have different attitudes towards religion, right? Bildad is the man for whom he's named in the Bible is a guy who observes all the proprieties, all the apparent pieties that he's supposed to practice. But deep down, he's as much a money grubber as Peleg is. And indeed, the whole enterprise, regardless of professed faith, is moved by the profit motive. These guys are capitalists. And Melville's not saying that's a bad thing. The Pequod itself is a capitalistic enterprise. When Ishmael ships on, he's interested in what kind of lay he's going to get. And he thinks, well, 275th lay, that is portion, return, dividend on the investment of his labor. And then Bildad and Peleg conspire, they play a little good cop, bad cop game on him, and they trap him into feeling content with a 300th lay, right? When Queequeg comes along and they see how good a harpooner he is, they give him a 50th lay. And they don't really care that this guy is not a Caucasian and he's not a member of the Congregational Church, right? If he's that good a harpooner, we want him on our ship. We don't give a damn what God he kneels to. So that this plays into the game as well. This is a criticism of our society. The Pequod, and what is the significance of the name Pequod? There was Melville's idea, or Melville's belief, which was common at the time, that the Pequods were an Indian tribe that went extinct, right? And then they discovered that they weren't extinct, and they put up the casino in Connecticut, right? What's it called? No, it's true. A wonderful story. But that Melville thought they were extinct, yeah, important. This is a voyage to extinction, like our own lives. Believe it or not, I'm going to die, and so will you. Wow, what's it all been worth for? What's the nature of all that struggle on the ship and in our forging a livelihood? if we're all going to die? That's the question that resonates throughout the book, right? And this journey, this voyage, in pursuit not just of the whale, but for Ahab, the white whale. The whale raised one more level of meaning, that the whale is somehow representative of some unknown condition of life itself. That's the journey of the Pequod. And then who is Ahab? Ahab takes his name from Ahab of old, right? This is a man who denied God, who permitted the sacrifices to be presented to the god Baal instead of the god Jehovah. And Jehovah is a very jealous God, His ego obviously is fragile, and he needs everybody to bow down before him. And so Ahab is looked upon as evil. Is this Ahab evil? A lot of critics will tell you he is. I don't think he is at all. One of the things to keep your eye on as you continue reading is the degree to which Ahab is also a kind of Christ figure, right? And in fact, even his death is Christ-like. And this Ahab is an unimportant element to remember, is an orphan, like Pip himself, with whom he forges a particularly close friendship and bond. So, again, something to keep in mind. This crew is an Klutz deputation. That name, where does it come from? It comes from the French Revolution. Klutz was an aristocrat, but he wanted to lead a delegation of men from all parts of life to participate in the French Revolution and thereby bring about a world order of unity of all races, of all peoples. It's a foolish mission that Klutz is on. Ultimately, the French Republic, eats him too. He's also killed as a traitor. But that he's guided by a noble idea. And the man who was in charge of this is Ahab. I'll stop in one moment. Just let me call your attention to the chapter that I think ends this introductory section called Loomings. And that is the one in which we meet Bulkington, the lee shore. Let me see if I can, page number, sorry. 106. Okay. The port, now, Bulkington is quite aware of the fact that he can be safe, or appear to be safe, by staying at home. But he goes out onto the sea. And why? And this is really a guiding idea in the book. The port would fain give succor. The port is pitiful. The port is safety, comfort, hearthstone, supper, warm blankets, friends, all that's kind to our mortalities. But in that gale, and remember we've been prepared for this notion of the journey of the Pequod and then a journey of going out whaling before with the picture in the Spouter Inn. But where we see the ship in a gale. But in that gale, the port, the land, is that ship's direst jeopardy. Comfort is jeopardy. That you may spend your life, if you don't risk it for things that matter to you, you will have lived for nothing. She must fly, that is, depart from, all hospitality. One touch of land, though it but graze the keel, would make her shudder through and through. With all her might, she crowds all sail offshore, in so doing fights against the very winds that fain would blow her homeward. Seeks all the last sea's landlessness again, for refuge's sake forlornly rushing into peril, her only friend, her barest foe. Know ye now, Bulkington, glimpses do ye seem to see of that mortality. Intolerable truth, that all deep, earnest thinking is but the intrepid effort of the soul to keep the open independence of the sea, which we normally think of as dangerous, while the wildest winds of heaven and earth conspire to cast her on the treacherous, slavish, and that idea, slavish shore, that the conditions of life too often render us slaves, that we are in a way no worse than the slaves, the black slaves, when we worry about freeing. We are concerned with their freedom, and yet we ourselves are slaves to our jobs and to the routines of life. But in landlessness alone resides the highest truth, shoreless, indefinite as God. Indefinite as God. So better is it to perish in that howling infinite than be ingloriously dashed upon the lee, even if that were safety. For worm-like then, oh, she would crave and crawl to land. Terrors of the terrible. Is all this agony in vain? To take heart, O Bulkington. Bear thee grimly, demigod. Up from the spray of thy ocean perishing, straight up leaps thy apotheosis. And that too is a foreshadowing of the end of the book, and what is, in a sense, the victory in defeat of Ahab. But that is paired with the epilogue in which we see the resurrection of Ishmael. Okay, I talked for a long time. You have questions, comments? Go ahead.
Do you think that Ishmael being an orphan and being dogged with bad luck is really Melville himself? And did he see himself that way, do you think?
Does he see himself that way? Absolutely not. He always looks to the bright side. When he sees something that is discouraging, he tries to turn it around and see it as a good thing. And indeed, that's also in character with him in the novel, because the coffin, which has been meant, the life buoy that has been meant, it's a coffin, becomes his life buoy. So that's really a very important element in the book. Yeah?
So if Isaac is the father of the tribes of Israel, the chosen people, Ishmael is the father of the tribes of Arabia, the unchosen people.
The Muslims, the ones that Trump is going to keep out.
Yeah, the one, Trump's tribe. And ironically, Ishmael is chosen to survive. The unchosen one is chosen to be the only survivor at the end of the book.
And the question is why? And we'll find that out during the course of the reading of the book. And it's, it is emphasized again and again and again. When I started my teaching career, my first job, there was a fellow who said, oh, he loved Melville. He was glad I was joining the department. Oh, both of us love Melville. And he was teaching Melville, and they gave me some other course to teach. But as an act of generosity to the rookie, he gave me a copy of his syllabus. And in his syllabus, he said, because he was teaching students who, like students today, didn't have all that much time to do a lot of reading. So he gave him something like, 20 chapters to read. Everything else was unimportant. And I said, Pat, you've thrown away the book. The book is not the plot. And in fact, this is one of the things about Moby Dick that makes it so different. We say it's the great American novel. I'm hesitant to say that because it's not really a novel. Yes, there is a basic plot, right? Young man goes to sea. Captain is austere and severe. He has an intention that is different from that of the declared purpose of the crew. He wants to kill in vengeance Moby Dick, and Moby Dick winds up killing him, and the ship is sunk. It's practically a short story, but that's not the book. That's the frame on which the book. The book is precisely in chapters like cetology, in the attempt of man to say, okay, I'm confronting the whale, and as we know from the beginning, lots of different definitions of the whale, lots of different whales. How do we classify them? How do we? How do we speak of them as species and genus and so forth? And so let's just think of them as books. We study books in order to get an education. Let us get our education. This is a different kind of education, but also in the fundamental conditions of being. And everything is treated that way. A rope is not just a rope, it becomes a symbol of something else. And that, excuse me, that symbol is not really fast, it's always changing. It's always throwing off flashings. It means something else besides. And it's always working on our minds. We are like, Ishmael is Melville, really, but we are also all like Ishmael. We're placed in that position, trying to figure out what the hell this is all about, And he never lets us go from that. So, when you get to a chapter and you say, oh, well, that doesn't advance, it's not in the classic comics, right?
That's what I was thinking.
That's not
what I was thinking about, the classic comics, right?
I love the classic comic of Moby Dick, beautifully drawn. I just thought it was wonderful, but it's not the book. I had a president, imagine this, a college president, who, because he wanted to have a nice vacation paid for by the college, decided he would teach a course on American sea literature, because he was, this was out of the museum, and starts with M down in Connecticut, Mystic. And so he was going along on a cruise. And so he called me up because I taught a course in film. And he said, can I get the film of Moby Dick? And I said, why? He said, well, I'm teaching this course. And I said, bastard, don't you dare teach those students Moby Dick from Gregory Peck's film, Judge the film for what it is, but it's not the book. It really is not. And so, because we're conditioned by our novel reading and say, come on, let's move on, we don't read it properly. The joy of the book, as in Thomas Browne, is in precisely that poetry in which we're chasing meaning and trying to understand this web, this loom on which life is created. Line by line, and the different lines as we send the shuttle across, they lay against each other in contrast, in complement and contrast. And that is, if you read this, especially this opening section carefully, you see precisely how it's not just by chance that he goes off. No, that each chapter is, in a way, a reflection on the one that precedes it. Yeah?
Tell us a little about Father Mapple. There are a couple lines here. I have striven to be thine more than to be this world's or mine own.
Wait, let me get there where you're
at the end of the sermon. The sermon.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it now.
Next to the last. Chapter 9, the sermon.
Okay, and you're at the end?
Yeah, the last 3 lines before the...
Yes, that's, oh yeah.
I have striven to be thine, more than to be this world's or mine own. Yet this is nothing. I leave eternity to thee. For what is man that he should live out the lifetime of his God?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Well, this is in fact, I was going to read that or at least comment. I'm thinking about writing about Moby Dick. I really am, because before I die. And it sort of goes back and forth in my head. Should I first write about Moby Dick so that I'm sure that I've written that before I die, or should I write my memoir before I die? And so I don't do either. I'm like Balaam's ass, But, yeah, and this is what I actually made a note to myself. Delight it is to him whom all the waves and the billows of the sea of the boisterous mob can never shake from this sure keel of the ages. Blessed is he, but not me, Father Mapple. With all the certitude that he spouts in this sermon, he himself doubts. Remember, look at the beginning of that paragraph. He drooped and fell away from himself for a moment, then lifting his face to them again, showed a deep joy in his eyes as he cried out with a heavenly enthusiasm. For them, but he himself is not sure of what he has said. All right? So, an eternal delight and deliciousness will be his, who, coming to lay him down, can say with his final breath, if he can say with his final breath, O Father, chiefly known to me by thy rod, in terms of punishment, Mortal, and incidentally, the ultimate meaning of the book is precisely against that the power of God as the man who, as the figure, as the power that uses the rod. Chiefly known to me by thy rod, mortal or immortal, here I die, whether it is an afterlife or not. Having striven to be thine, more than to be this world's or mine own. This is Mapple. Yet this is nothing. I leave eternity to thee. For what is man that he should live out the lifetime of our God? What is, because God will exist, or whatever we think of being God, that faith will exist past our own mortal existence. I think it's very significant that we close that chapter on Mapple with this uncertainty in the preacher himself, where the preacher is not confident of what he is preaching, that this is his duty, his job, and yet there always resides a doubt within him. I remember there was a preacher, a minister, the Dutch Reformed church that my family went to, and he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and he wasn't going to have, he wasn't going to lose his ability to have an erection no matter what, and he was going to, because he was a man of God. So he told this congregation that he would be an example to them of how to live, of how to die. Right? But really deep down he sort of felt that if I do this, that God will save me. And what happened was that he died. And at the end, he was bitter and he cursed God. He literally cursed God, and he was just destitute because God did not pluck him out and make him the exception. But he had sex until the end. Anyway, go ahead.
I was taught when I first read Moby Dick that the whale was the anthropomorphic.
Except it can't be anthropomorphic because he's not a person.
He's not a person, but he takes on characteristics of God.
Yes.
And that the whale is God, and that Ahab is in search and is vengeful and brutal and angry with God for what God has, the things that have befallen him.
Not just him.
Not just him?
No.
The world.
Well,
Not because he's a prince of, Ahab really is a prince of justice. Oddly enough, because he's a tyrant, but he's a prince of justice. You cannot, I don't think one can say the whale equals. Ahab himself says, we'll get to this next time. He says, be the white whale agent or be the white whale principal. Whether the whale is the cat's paw as it is of whatever it is that governs this whole shebang, or if the whale, that is nature itself, is all there is and there's nothing beyond that. Whichever one it is, I will fight you. Why? Because I have reason, we think God has reason, let's meet as equals. Let's talk this out, Let's explain it to me. I am made of the same stuff you are. That's what it says in the Bible. And if I am made of the same, then you explain to me why people suffer. Just as Melville, just as in Redburn, Redburn wondering, why is this mother trying to feed her children? She hasn't even enough strength to lift the food to the children's mouths.
Would you agree that the Pequot is a microcosm of the world?
In a way it is intended to be that. I think it's a way of speaking of the journey of life. It's the vessel in which we live our lives. We go from land into the infinite, as it were, and into this metaphysical speculation. Yeah.
So why do you say that Ahab is Christ-like?
You want me to tell you everything? No, we'll see it. We'll see it.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's look for it as we go along. Yeah, he is. I mean, I say it because Melville treats him that way. Yes.
Thank you for what you've explored. Why did you emphasize Ishmael being orphan rather than outcast, or is it not?
Because in the Bible he is an outcast, right? And that's an injustice. Our Ishmael, Melville's Ishmael, is like everyone else, presented as a kind of orphan. And then the question is, what is the response to that orphanhood? What is the response to our not having our parent, God, caring for us? What do we put in its place? Yeah, go ahead.
A different follow-up question.
Sure.
As for the Pequot being a microcosm of our world, there are no women.
Yeah.
And this goes back to your notion that the sexuality of the South Islands was a surprise, if nothing else, to Melville. And what about homosexuality?
Yeah, that's one of the fashions that's been around now for about 30 years or so. In fact, in the MOOC that was recently, the professor said, "Oh, you can't deny the homoerotic." If you see the book in that light, I think it lessens it. I have no problem with dealing with homosexuality. I don't think it's a curse of God or anything. But if you see everything fits together in this book at some level, and if you see this relationship between Ishmael and Queequeg as homosexual, it lessens it. It turns it into something less than what it really represents. Yes, Ishmael, the metaphor is that of the marriage bed, no question about it. And Ishmael throws his leg over Queequeg. But that's all in the context of establishing this encounter as two people, two men, first mutual suspicion, certainly on Ishmael's part, and this guy worships a different god, Yojo, right? And ultimately, they understand that they're both brothers under the skin, that they are really married to each other, and it is Queequeg's death which gives the life buoy to Ishmael.
But I think he calls Queequeg his wife.
I'm sorry?
I think he calls Queequeg his wife.
Yes, he refers to him as his wife in that chapter, at the sort of the conclusion of that early presentation of their relationship. But I don't think it's sexual. I mean, there's nothing which give the use of the reference to marriage is meant to emphasize the way we are all married to each other in this enterprise. It never really takes that further step in the direction of a homosexual relationship. In the Dartmouth MOOC, the professor says, well, there's squeezing. They squeeze the sperm. How significant it is they squeeze sperm together. Well, I don't know. I never much enjoyed having my sperm squeezed, but I don't see that at all. And then he goes on to say the ambergris. Well, ambergris is something entirely different. You should read the book. It doesn't make sense. But that has been a fashion. I think that just as it is now, that way of reading the book has been superseded by seeing this as an anti-colonial work. And that's not the point. I mean, you can say that. Yeah, all men have to live together, yes. But that's not the point of the point of the book is not a political one about colonialism. Margaret.
I was just going to say that there really is something that we do know about the mystery of the writing of Moby Dick, and that is that during the writing of it, and just as he thought he had finished, he met Nathaniel Hawthorne and read Nathaniel Hawthorne carefully and understood suddenly that he could make his fiction, which would have a plot, be multifaceted and be different stories all under the same umbrella. In other words, that he could imbue it with many meanings. And one of the meanings is, and I wish I had been told this when I first read it as a 15-year-old, but the reason there's so much about whales and whaling is because he is commemorating a way of life that is, he can see, and everyone knew, was about to go under. And there would be no more of that whaling as it was practiced then.
It was cresting. It was
cresting. The harpoons were going to become like guns, and the need for whale oil was going to, of course, be superseded by kerosene.
Yeah, but it's true. At the same time, he makes of whaling a symbol, and he tries to keep hyping it up one level more in its signification. Kings are crowned with whale oil. Well, that's not really true, but that's he's using that as a way of transmuting this endeavor into a grand metaphor, intertwined metaphor of life itself in hierarchy. What is the meaning of hierarchy? What consecrates authority? You know, could we live in a state of anarchy? I mean, all these things are playing around in him.
Well, Hawthorne, my point is only that Hawthorne showed him that don't write something that is so off the rails, analogous that people can't understand it and it's unreadable, and don't write something that is basically a potboiler like T.P. Marry the two. And that's what Moby Dick managed to do, married the two, and created a book that's really for the ages.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Melville was trying to write a potboiler in Type P.
No, not really.
No,
But
I mean later on he's claimed that about Redburn, but I don't know. I mean that book strikes deeper in his heart than he would acknowledge, I think.
well, the success, maybe that's what I want to say.
Yes.
T.P. was that it was a sort of, bare-breasted South.
It's Fayaway. And then you look at the illustration of it, and there's Fayaway, no clothes on, and she's holding, looks like a bed sheet, but it's a sail, it's supposed to be a sail. Have you seen it? Wow. Yes?
We're not 19th century people, but how much of a choice, a serious choice, did Melville make to use the yays and days and thous, biblical language for that book?
Because he's right.
Quaker.
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because one of the problems that he faced was that of language. And other writers also had part of this. Do we write American? If we write American, it's not taken seriously. He was under the spell of the King James Bible, and he wanted to, just as the King James Bible itself, people did not speak that way at the time that the King James Bible was translated, because it was trying to allude to a more venerated time and mode of address and diction. And I think Melville is, in a sense, trying to do that as well. He has his jokes, that horrible joke about the Pythagorean maxim, which, you know what it's referring to? Well, Pythagoras didn't only square the hypotenuse. Not just that, he also forbade his followers to eat beans because of the result of beans. So he's talking about wind there. In life, there are headwinds unless you disobey the Pythagorean maxim, in which you have tailwinds. I mean, that's a horrible joke. I mean, he's Herman Melville, but God, come on, Herm. So that at the same time he can't resist those urges, there's a conscious, he is writing this book in order to write the greatest book that any American has ever written. I mean, that is it's like Norman Mailer, except much more dedicated to this idea. I am going to be a great writer. I am going to be, in America, the equivalent of Shakespeare. I mean, that's a deliberate choice.
Well, he basically stuffed everything he knew into that.
Yeah, it's all, and then he keeps reading, and that's the way he wrote Type E too. I mean, he stuffed other things in that he got other, and that's not because he wants to be just padded out and be a plagiarist. It's because of his ambition, and he felt that there was nothing wrong with that. Yeah.
There was something sort of otherness-like about the Quakers. Anyway, to people who weren't Quakers, and Nantucket was known as a Quaker Isle, and many of the people who owned those ships were Quakers, and so they said thee and thou. And it would, and
that's right too. Yeah.
It would have given them. He would have created sort of another world, an otherworldly atmosphere by summoning up the Quaker atmosphere.
That's quite true. Yeah.
There's a line in Philbrick's introduction to this edition that Melville never went to Nantucket.
That's right.
After he wrote Moby Dick.
He never went to Nantucket before he wrote it.
Yeah.
That's right.
He went to Nantucket after.
Absolutely right. And he writes about places in Europe, mentions them that he has not been to. Yes, quite true. And he felt that was all perfectly all right. He wasn't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. That's within the realm of the writer, Yeah. Is there one more? Anybody? Yeah.
Well, I think Gordon Wilder says in American Characteristics that one of the characteristics of American literature is boundarylessness.
Yes.
As opposed to a Europe of little states. There's no boundaries, and so I think he cites Moby Dick as an example of not just cramming everything you could into it, but just
everything.
Not of everything, bigness, space.
Yeah, I think that's an important perception, that America is a country at this time, without boundaries. We had this sense of almost infinite westward expansion. And one could say that at the point at which that frontier comes down and closes, that there's a kind of anxiety in the American consciousness that you could see reflected in our literature. What do we do now? You know, we were the nation of the eternal new start. We had, and the meaning, the transformation of the idea of the West was deeply embedded in the American imagination.
But I don't think we felt it until 9/11.
Oh,
that we were
that it closed down. Yeah.
That we were not a endless island.
I don't know.
That we were
maybe. I don't know.
To having our boundaries broken. I don't think we felt.
Listen, I want to thank you all for coming. I hope I didn't discourage you. I've been away from the classroom for a while. Maybe I'm a little rusty. I'm sorry. And I have my own. I hope to see you again. Tell your friends. Bring them out. Whatever. Okay. Thank you again. I really good questions. I loved your questions.